Let's share stories about and discuss the Michigan Dogman.
Bam for interest.
WTF is this?
Werewolf basically.
Michigan fag here. I only have two stories, neither are first-hand accounts. The first is supposedly one of the founding legends, 1800s. It is both straightforward and easily exaggerated hearsay. We have a group of loggers who, after a long day, settle around a fire. As with all good scary stories, they came to find themselves feeling watched. Apparently, someone or something was watching them from the tree line. Being big, burly loggers, they decided to ignore it, until the loudest, closest howl any of them had ever heard poured into the campsite. Anyway, a person was worth ignoring. Wolves, however, were not. So they quickly made their way into their cabins. The most basic description I have is a single-room longhouse lined with bunk beds. The door was tall to accommodate axes over shoulders and other things, so it was about 7 feet tall, with a small window about 6 feet up. The loggers, now in the cabin, began to discuss the oddity of having wolves so close the camp, when they heard the howl again. This time it was right outside the cabin. None of them having a gun at the time, they decided it was best to block the door and wait until sunrise to try and chase the wolves off. This is when they hear some guttural gibberish, something close to words, but not quite. Its sounds made their way around the cabin until they reached the door when, in the window, they could see the face of a very large dog looking in. I cannot give specifics on the breed, but we can imagine it was very mean looking. Given the period, a few loggers ran through some cheap prayers and the hound retreated. In the morning, they can to find no sign of wolves, other than some very large paw prints, walking around the cabin. The legendary part: the prints appeared to be bipedal. The second story is more modern, and from a friend of mine. Given the vagueness to some aspects of the story, I believe that it is in some part the truth. My friend is a longtime hunter, and back when he was 16 or so, he would go deer hunting with his uncle every year. At the time of the story, they were hunting a bit further north in the lower peninsula than they were used to, just a few hours northeast of Traverse City. My friend was situated up in a tree stand facing north, with his uncle about 50 yards south and facing east. Taking advantage of budding technology of texting at the time, the two would send silent messages of anything they spotted to each other. A few hours to sunset, my friend got a text from his uncle that said, "There's something under your tree stand." My friend could not see directly below him without causing a racket, so he simply asked, "Deer?" "No, looks like a young bear, maybe." "You see the mom?" "No." "Hold on, it's standing up." "Probably a bear." "Hold on." Now, my friend decided to stay still. His uncle approached and he heard something scurry off to his left, so when he looked down, he tells me he saw something like a dog run into the brush until he lost sight of it. His uncle called him down and quietly told him that it was trying to climb the tree stand. So he approached and pulled out his handgun. Now, my friend immediately suggested that it was just a bear, but the uncle insisted that was not a bear, because it tried to climb the stand, and not the tree. Making matters worse, it only ran off when he finally pointed the gun at the animal.
Well, interestingly enough, the only truly weird encounter I've had in my life was with something I have no better explanation for besides being a werewolf or some kind of bipedal long-muzzled creature. Story time. Be young, around 10 to 12 years old back in the 90s. Almost Christmas. Live in the mountains, tiny little town. Lots of snow in the winter. Stepdad curates a historic mine during off-season and has access to back roads most locals don't. I'm traveling with my stepdad in the early evening, dusk out but not quite dark, on one of the roads that winds up the mountain to the mine. We are driving in my mom's big orange 1980s Dodge pickup, huge truck, huge tires. Snow berms on either side of the road are a couple feet taller than the truck, as the snow had been going for days on end. That and the road being recently plowed made for huge berms. We are going up into the woods to cut down our own Christmas tree. Chatting with stepdad about whatever, both of us watching the road as we cruise along at about 25 to 30 miles per hour up this twisty-ass road. Suddenly, a figure drops from over the snow berm on the right side of the road, maybe a dozen or 2 feet in front of us. My stepdad brakes, and we both get a fairly good look at it. Incredibly tall, with a long muzzle like a dog or wolf, covered in hair. I don't remember seeing a tail. But I do remember its huge arms and back legs, and pointy ears. It stood bipedal. The figure pauses for a split second in the road, whips its head towards us briefly, then crouches down and vaults over the berm on the left side of the road, without even taking a step. My stepdad lets off the brake and keeps driving, tight-lipped and pale with wide eyes. I'm too stunned to do anything right away, so I stare out at the road. After a few minutes, I turn to my stepdad. "Did you?" He cuts me off before I even finish. "I don't want to talk about it." Suffice to say, I'm terrified by the time we stop for the stupid tree. But we make short work of it and are soon back on our way home. Feel panicky on the way back, and notice even stalwart stepdad seems pretty shaken and drives through the spot where we saw the thing a little quicker than he should have considering road conditions. He still refused to talk about it years later, anytime I tentatively brought it up. Still can't explain WTF I saw. Would think I'm crazy, except it was obvious my stepdad saw it too.
This has happened to me so much, a couple of times I would nope the hell out. Not the best writer out there, but I'll try my best. Walking home from school one Friday, as my house is just nearby. About 4 of us live in the same neighborhood and we would usually walk home together as it would save gas. I was 17 at the time, oldest by about a couple of months. Shooting the shit about what we're gonna do. My buddy Jack, who I still talk to, suggests we play hide and seek. We all agreed that we would meet at Jack's and I houses at around midnight, as we were neighbors. 11:35 p.m. and we all met up. Set up the basic rules. No leaving the neighborhood. No hiding in houses, obvious. No hiding in cars. Seeker had to have a chem light, glow stick, visible on them, etc. Came up with a phrase to tell if it was people playing or not. Wonderful night for a walk, isn't it? Bit too cold if you ask me. Nose goes to see who would count first. My friend James is the counter and proceeds to count to 50. James started counting and the 3 of us ran off. Wooded area behind my house, all owned by me. Mad dash straight towards it. While inside wooded area I covered myself with a bunch of leaves to hide better. 5 minutes and receive a text from Jack, he was found. Few minutes later another text, our 4th person Tyler was found. Chuckling to myself as I haven't been found yet. A rule we decided to throw in that night was that the people found have to stay with the seeker and have chem lights on them as well. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15 minutes passed until I started hearing movement. Look up to see 3 green lights searching in the woods. I was scared that they would find me. Checking my phone removed a lot of the leaves covering me. After a little bit of watching them, they left. Thinking they know where I am, I moved a bit deeper in. Heard a lot of animals moving around. Even spooked a rabbit. A few minutes of moving deeper I went back to hiding. Saw the 3 lights again, only they were a lot further away. Safe for now. As I was watching the lights I felt uneasy. Noticing my surroundings I noticed I was deeper in than I thought. Old town down fort we built a year ago and a pipe-like tunnel. Tunnel looks like picture, but there is no visible exit. Decided to check out our old fort for old time's sake. Receive a text from James saying they gave up. About 30 minutes in, so I figured they would. Reply back to meet me at the starting point. Continue to mess around with our fort. Notice something off from the last time I was there? That was 2 weeks ago. Turned my flashlight on and noticed a lot of bones laying around the place. Animal must have died here. Being a hunter I knew they were from a buck. Big one too. Noticed that no animals were moving around anymore. Thinking I was getting worked up over nothing. I was a man after all. At least I thought I was. Always carried a hunting knife for protection though. Decided to keep looking around. Primal instincts telling me I'm being watched. Don't know where from though. Making my way back, there was still no signs of life around me. Usually see deer or at least kicked up a rabbit. But nothing. On my way back I had to walk past the tunnel. Wanting to calm my nerves, I decided to shine my light inside it. Walking up cautiously with my knife at the ready. Coyotes were known to be seen around there lately. Upon reaching the entrance, I felt sick to my stomach. Like I shouldn't be doing this. Everything in me was telling me to walk away from there. Against better judgment, I looked inside. What I saw still creeps me out to this day. From what I could guess, about 35 feet down, I could make out something inside. Thinking my friends were messing with me, I shouted out our phrase. No response. Thinking they didn't hear me, I did it again, only louder. Raising my voice just pissed this thing off or something as it turned towards me. I could only make out a pair of glowing eyes. Made a straight line out of as fast as I could back towards our houses. I could hear it following me. Thinking this was some stray coyote, I turned around to try and use size to scare it. Had to been about a good 60 feet away from it. There out of the pipe was this thing. Looked like a coyote/dog, but bigger, a lot bigger. It was looking right at me. By this time I was near my actual backyard, so I booked it out of there. Screaming out for my friends to come. Upon exiting, I saw the 3 green lights running towards me. After I was out, I yelled at them to run inside my house and grab my shotguns/rifles, whatever we could find, to kill this bastard. Once loaded up, we decided walked back out there, and my Labrador was freaking the hell out. She knew something was out there. I looked outside and just saw this giant shadowy figure exiting the woods. Pissed off, I turned on my back door lights and ran out there. Seeing all the lights and 4 people running out must have scared this thing back into the woods. Friends were asking me what the hell was this thing. Best answer I could give was a coyote. Lying through my teeth, trying the best to calm everyone down, tried even lying to myself. 30 minutes passed and there was no sign of whatever it was. Before we went back inside for the night, I swear it was still out there looking at us. The last thing that happened that night was hearing some weird messed up animal call. Not wanting to get eaten or worse, and I asked them to stay the night over. They agreed and we went into the basement and tried to sleep. My dog wouldn't leave my side, she knew I was scared. The whole night I kept walking back upstairs and looking outside. Nothing else happened that night except for me not sleeping at all. Morning came and my dad got off his shift and saw us with the guns out. Told my friends to go home, but didn't chew me out for having other people using our guns, let alone having them out and loaded in the city limits. Told my dad what happened. Looked at me with the whitest face ever, not to go there at night ever again. My dad is a big man and even I could see the fear in his eyes. Listened to him and never went out there at night alone ever again.
I was camping with my sister and our horses at least 2 decades ago in Wyoming. The first night when we set up camp, the horses were getting spooked in their makeshift pen, electric wires with stakes we can set up quick. I went to check on them, and as I went near, an awful smell hit me all of a sudden. On the rear of my horse was a sticky sap-like substance. No trees were near the pen, with flower petals stuck all over it. Was so odd because the plains we rode through were bare of the lilac, yellow, and amber flowers stuck on her. I brushed them off, said goodnight to my sister, then we went to bed. In the middle of the night I woke up and had to take a pee, so I grabbed my rifle and walked out of the tent. Before finding a nice tree to go behind, I checked the horses and they were so unusually ecstatic. Both were pacing and breathing heavily while saliva was dripping from their mouths. It wasn't any medical issue, but seemed like the behavior horses have when about to mate or are overly excited. I leave them and walk maybe 20 yards from camp when all of a sudden it's that same smell from earlier. Like a rotting, sweaty, trash scent. Then I hear something quite large break brush another 20 feet or so from me. I draw my rifle and wait to hear it again, but nothing. I whistle 3 notes slowly to announce my presence and see if it will startle the coyote or whatever enough to make it leave. All of a sudden it whistles the same melody but backwards and in a much deeper pitch. I'm starting to freak out, so I raise my rifle when I see an at least 7 to 8 silhouette emerge. Feel the bush in front of me in the moonlight. Pale and gray with long limbs, short fur lines the outside of its shape, but I can't make out the face because the moon is at its back and in front of me. I fire a shot, but I think it missed, and in the brief second of discharge the flash shows a gangly frame of what looks like a goat standing up. I fire one more shot and run to camp, as I hear the horse neighing and squealing in an ecstatic frenzy. My sister is already out of her tent with her rifle as I get back and tell her what happened. She assures me it was a bear, but I have seen hundreds in my time living in Wyoming and I know it wasn't. We stay up until daybreak and head back to the farm as fast as we could. I know she still doesn't believe me, but my grandmother, who was very keen even into her old age, knew I was being truthful. She is the one who told me of the creature/deity Pan and how animals go into manic ecstasy in his presence and how he will adorn them with his essence and the gifts of Mother Nature. I truly think he is who I experienced that night.
Get ready for some OC bitches. Be me. Probably 13 at the time. Exploring abandoned section of university in my town. Friends scuttle off into a weird basement thing. I keep watch. Looking around in windows and stuff. Look into ground floor windows and see two yellow eyes looking out of it. Charming moment.jpg. Friggin' sprint out of there, screaming for friends. Reminds me of a memory I had hidden away. Probably 4 or 5. Going to bed, have ground floor room with large window. Nodding off as I hear a scratching/tapping on window. Look up from bed. Looks like a creepy ass wolf is looking at me, would have to be like 7 feet tall to see in my window. Hands were shielding its eyes around the window like it was peering at me. Scream like a bitch. Run the hell out of there. Parents convinced me it was a dream. Know now for a fact that it wasn't a dream. Did I see a Dogman? I lived in wooded areas of Michigan both times this happened.
What I am telling you is a true story. I am convinced that it aligns with the Midwest urban legend of Dogman. It was 1:30 in the morning. I got out of my shift late from a restaurant I was working at during this time. I was going over to my friend's house in a cul-de-sac because we were going to hang out and drink some beer. By the time I got there, nobody was answering the door, and when I called and texted them, I received no reply. I waited about 10 minutes. After waiting, and growing impatient, another one of my old friends, who I have always been a little creeped out by, drove past the house I was waiting at. He did not notice me waiting outside. For some reason I was curious, and wanted to see what he was up to, so I decided to walk further down to the end of the cul-de-sac towards the U-turn area. I did not see him get out of the car, but this friend was a big pot smoker, so I decided to walk around the back side of his house and see if he was lighting up. By this time it was probably 2 o'clock to 2:30. I have my phone out as I am walking around the house checking to see if I received any texts when I hear a screech that was so weird it is almost impossible to explain it, very similar to the humming of a bee and a lion growling. I look up and something is running across my friend's backyard. It is extremely fast, and after it ran about 20 yards it stopped. The figure was hunched over, stood at approximately 6'2" to 6'8" tall by my guess, and stared at me. I did not know what to do, and my first instinct was flight, so I ran. When I started running, I kept thinking the thing was going to chase me, so I looked behind me, nothing there. I kept running. I ran all the way back to my car in a dead sprint for about 25 miles, completely out of breath. I drove home. To this day I asked the friend if that was him behind his house. He denied it more than once fervently. I believe I saw Dogman or some sort of alien being. Please discuss.
Be me. 8 years ago. On trampoline with friend. Treeline is about 40 to 50 feet away, probably less. See big ass black dog. Small bear sized, not uncommon for northern Michigan. We look at it and expect it to leave, as the neighbor usually comes out with a shotgun when this happens. It stands up on its hind legs. ofug.webm. Very muscular build, kind of hard to tell because of the shade though. Extremely tall, had to be at least 8 feet. Very obviously human-like features, muscles, etc. Right on cue, neighbor comes out with Spanish shotgun. Shoots at it. It squeals, screams, and sprints back into the woods. Friend's mom comes outside. We tell her what we saw, neighbor backs us up. She still doesn't believe us. I love Michigan.
I like telling this story every so often on here. Me. 7 years ago. Sitting on the roof. Just chilling. Mom relaxing in the hot tub with my little sister. They go inside. Start to get really uncomfortable for no reason. Realize something is watching me. Could be crackheads. Start scanning the privacy fence. See the brown outline of a head and shoulders against the bushes. Stand my dumbass up and walk to the edge of the roof for a better look. Just staring at it. It lets out this friggin' scream roar and I run to the other side of the roof and friggin' jump off. Run inside crying. Parents don't believe me until they hear and see some weird shit. The weird thing is it didn't sound what people think Bigfoot sounds like, or the swamp ape. I live in the south. Also directly behind the privacy fence, was a chain link fence that you couldn't stand on without it making hella racket, and I could see a little below the thing's armpits because of how tall it was. It had to have been right around 8 feet tall for me to see that much of it over the 6 feet fence.
I had a very similar experience. Early May of this year, GF and I car camping along M22/31 on our way up to Dogman. Getting dark and raining very hard. Decide to find the nearest state park to spend the night. Drive all the way out to Wilderness State Park. Pitch black. Pouring. No one there, no rangers, it was still a little early in the season. Find the lot for cars and campers and park for a while. Get in the back of my Jeep and begin getting ready to sleep. As I'm beginning to cover the windows, I'm positive I see something walk between some trees. Didn't look like a deer, seemed like a tall shape. Shrug it off in hopes that I'm just trying to scare myself. A couple minutes later something bumps the car, like a big bump, like the car shifts. Nope. JPG the hell out of there, don't look to see what it was and drive to a Walmart parking lot in Mackinac City for the night. Yeah, I love Michigan too.
Read about some bullshit witch story on a paranormal Michigan website. Yeah, okay. Get friends and head out to the cemetery some which is supposed to be at Inada. 45-minute drive in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, place doesn't show up on Google Maps so I'm flying blind once. We get out there. Eventually find it. Windy as hell. Pull into a dirt trail that people park in. Open door to car. Wind friggin' stops. Friends too much of pussies to get out of car. Whatever, I'll go alone. Start walking around looking for some witch pussy. Noise of chain link fence rattle in the back of cemetery. Oh boy. Go check it out. Leads to some dumpy broken headstone laying in the back corner of the cemetery which is supposed to belong to the witch. Nope. Out after I shine my light on it. Walk back to car figuring it was one of my friends. Once I get in the car realize that my friends would have had to do a full-out sprint past me to rattle the fence if it was them. GTFO and go to Steak and Shake. Michigan is spoopy, pick related, it's the entrance to the cemetery.
Alright, this happened to me very recently and I want to share my experience before I forget too many of the details. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what a dogman is, check out this. Pick related, it's a map I drew of the area. So this happened yesterday at around 4 p.m. Hanging out with a buddy of mine, we'll call him Cameron. We were chatting about whatever and walking away from his house, which was in the suburbs near the outskirts of town. We walked down a rarely traveled road that led to the more rural areas outside of the city. We like to walk here sometimes, it's nice and quiet and has a lot of nature. But this time we decided to check out a big apple orchard on the side of the road. Now, in the winter right now, everything is dead. So it was just a bunch of dead trees with all of their wet leaves on the ground. We walked down one of the spaces between the trees, a bit closer to the dirt trail. Walking through the orchard, nothing but identical dead trees everywhere. I joked about the people from the houses we saw next to the orchards shooting at us for trespassing or some shit. We found a used, rusty raccoon trap hanging from a tree branch. Continued on camera and got spooked. I asked him what was up. It was an oddly human-shaped hole in a barn wall that fooled us from a distance. We got closer and found a run-down and seemingly abandoned old wooden barn. It looked like a cliché haunted house from Scooby-Doo or something. Broken roof segments, made almost completely of wood, missing boards and holes everywhere. There was a bunch of junk stored inside it, and a silo behind the barn. We didn't get any closer to it and left. Got to the end of the orchard. There was a forked path that led to another section of even bigger orchards. Both paths were blocked by fallen trees. We climbed over the smaller tree on the left side. It was sunset by this point, raining lightly. Heard multiple dogs barking in the distance, just regular dog barks. You know how when you look through an orchard, it's perfectly aligned to where you have to look down a path to see something? You can generally only see one path at a time. Out of nowhere I see this friggin' creature darting across the path. It was so much larger than a dog, but that's what I initially thought it was. It was an unnaturally dark, jet black thing on all fours. It had to have been at least 5 feet tall, and that was on all fours. This was no ordinary dog. This was friggin' swole, like really muscular. It seriously moved like it was a human that should have been standing on 2 legs but was forcing itself to run 4 legs. You know? Like its hips were sticking out too far and it looked awkward. It had broad shoulders, so much bigger than its hips in comparison. We booked it. Sprinted back the way we came. Almost tripped but thankfully didn't. Emerged back onto the side of the road and it didn't follow us. But someone else did. Some redneck in a pickup truck was idling at the spot where the dirt path meets the road. He glared at us and we pretended not to see him. We walked down the road trying not to look back at him. After a while, Cameron turns to me with a terrified look on his face. He lost his friggin' iPhone in the orchard while we were running. It was dark at this point. Nope, I ain't no puss, so I agreed to go looking for his phone with him. Phone is on silent, in a black colored phone case. Good job, Cameron. We went back to the dirt path. The guy in the truck was gone. We quietly and hesitantly walked down the same path we ran down earlier. Our method of finding his phone was to call it repeatedly. If the phone was face up, it would light up in the darkness and we would see it. If the phone was face down, we would still hear it vibrate. Once we got close to the forked path, we both had different hallucinations for lack of a better word. I saw what I can only describe as something that looked very similar to an anomaly from Stalker. A visual distortion that moved away from me until I lost track of it. Asked Cameron if he saw it, he didn't. We climb the tree again and he holds his hand out behind him and makes a shush gesture. Ask him very loudly what the hell he's doing. Gets pissed off at me, we argue. Heavy breathing. We quickly walked away from the path and back into the orchards. Keep looking for his phone in the darkness. Nothing else weird happens and we eventually give up and head back to the road. Cameron accepts the fact that his phone is lost and that we did everything we could to find it. Is still really pissed off. End up finding the phone laying against a tree trunk on a sidewalk in his neighborhood. He must have dropped it on our way to the orchard. We went back in there for nothing. Either way, we were both still really happy that we recovered his phone and that we survived our encounter with the Dogman. Feel free to ask me some questions.
Hey/X/ I don't really know what the procedure is on this board, but I just had a friggin' scary experience happen to me and my mates. I'm from /K/ by the way. If you guys don't know, there is a long-time tradition in northern Michigan called polar bearing. It is pretty much just camping in a dugout snow cave or tent in the middle of winter. Me and my friends went up to Gaylord, I know stupid name, to hike/camp in the forest. We all are major shitheads and brought our AR-15s, various handguns and my one buddy's Saiga he had just bought. Our plan was to hike to the campsite and then go shooting varmints later in the day. We got to the trailhead and got our shit ready for a hike. There was no one else on the sign-up sheet for staying the night, so we were all pretty happy. We hiked in for a few miles until we found the campsite. The place was a friggin' reek, shit and trash thrown everywhere. We were pissed at the previous hikers for leaving such a mess. Boy Scouts leave not trace shit. After we had finished cleaning the campsite, we split into groups to go find small game. I went with my buddy Dakota, he had the Meme Gun 2000, to try and track down some small critters. This might be the time to tell you that I had a .22 on me for red squirrels. They are some tasty buggers. We start walking through the woods, until my buddy finds some prints in the snow and mud. They are a bunch of coyote tracks, but I thought they looked a bit weird as the paw was too big and the spaces separating them were a bit off. Dakota didn't care that much about specifics, and all he cared about was bagging a few coyotes. Later that evening it was getting dark and I wanted to go back to camp. We did not have NVGs or any of that fancy shit, so the chances of getting something was minuscule. I had been getting bad vibes all day, because of all the black squirrels I saw. They are major bad luck, and if you kill them you supposedly get cursed. I digress. My buddy Dakota wants to stay out longer and he and I bicker until we hear a familiar yipping. Coyotes. Dakota gets his stupid friggin' shotgun up and shoots the slug where the yipping was coming from. I scream at him to stop because we hadn't even seen the little buggers, yet let alone had the time to aim at one. I turn on the spotlight I had brought, aka giant acid flashlight, and start surveying the forest. I see a coyote in the edge of the opposite tree line, but it's a bit odd. For one, it didn't bolt when it hears the shotgun and it was on its hind legs. The thing was standing up and on closer inspection was way larger than a coyote. My friend shot at it but it ran just as he fired. It friggin' ran like on two legs. We were super freaked at this point and booked it to the camp. As we ran we heard it howling and almost pissed ourselves. We made it back to camp and told the rest of our friends what we saw and that we needed to book it out of there. They laughed at us and told us that we had too much to drink. We kept on trying to get them to leave but all they did was laugh at us. Until my friend Kyle saw it. It was at the edge of the campfire light just watching us. Kyle was having none of it and shot the bastard with his Glock. Wrong move that just seemed to piss it off and it started screeching and ran out of sight. All of us are scared out our minds by now. We don't even pack, we just grab our rifles and start heading for the trailhead. We haul ass, but whatever that thing was, it was fast. We heard it coming from behind us. I was taking up the rear and swiveled, just as the thing was 5 feet from me. I unloaded my entire mag into the thing, and it dropped. I had already soiled myself at this point, and started running as fast as I could with the rest of my friends. We heard more of the howling the rest of the way, but never saw another one of those things. We made it to the car and once I got cell signal I called 911 and told them what happened. The operator just thought I was drunk. So my buddies go to the nearest ranger station and tell them what had happened. They say some shit like we ran into some starving coyotes. That was no coyote. They let us stay until dawn and then take us back to our camp in a cabata. On the way, we find my spent brass and a shitton of blood. They say I must have hit one, no shit, and the others dragged its body away to eat. Our camp is a total loss, shit thrown everywhere. Rangers help us clean up and still insist it was coyotes. Just got back at 6 o'clock and have no idea what to think about this.
Live in the deep south in the middle of the woods basically. Grandfather, who died almost 2 years ago, has Native American ancestry and family land is basically all old Native American hunting grounds or some shit. He used to tell me stories about when he was a kid and how all the old people used to literally board up all the windows and doors every full moon. Years later I'm tracking the deer probably about a mile from my grandfather's house. Have a tree stand in one of the trees and go there to decide to stay there until I see some deer. Don't see a single deer or animal the entire time up there. It's starting to get dark and just remember I didn't bring a flashlight, so I know I won't make it back to the house before it gets dark. Decide to stay the night in the friggin' tree stand. Fall asleep for a few hours I think and start to hear shit crashing through the woods. Fully awake and it's pitch black out except for a full moon. Don't think anything about it at first, just thinking it's a family of deer running through the woods or a buck scratching trees with its antlers. Sound gets closer and closer and sounds louder than I thought it was. Sounds like a friggin' truck driving through the woods. Sounds start coming from all different directions. Getting really scared now. Suddenly it sounds like something is trying to climb the friggin' tree my stand is on. Feel tree jerking around like it's about to fall. Want to get down and run for it and take my chances. The metal ladder at the bottom of the tree stand is broken off, and since I can't see shit good I'd probably break my ankle trying to jump it. Load my shotgun up with game shot slugs and start firing at the ground. Hit something that sounds like a huge bear. We don't have bears in this area. It cries like a dog and runs away. Other noises follow it. Finally sun comes up hours later without having another indecent. Have to jump down and hike it home paranoid as a squirrel. Make it home scared shittles.
I was camping in Oklahoma in a place that you have to sign in and out. They don't have any designated camping spots, you just find a place and set up camp. I have one of those one-person tents that are long and narrow. As I was about to fall asleep I kept hearing rustling outside. I didn't think anything of it at first, then something big kept pressing against my tent. Then the tent started to compress on me and I started to freak out, and grabbed my gun. After a while it left, and I unzipped the tent and ran for my car. As I was running I heard branches break, and looked behind me to see what had to be an 8-foot-tall creature barreling down on me. It was about 10 feet away when I saw it. When I looked back at my car I was probably 8 feet away from it. Last thing I know is I'm hit hard from the back and wake up to sunlight staring at my muffler with scraps all over my body and face, blood on my head. It had to have launched me a good feet. So what the hell did I encounter?
This was about 2 years ago, late November in NW Oregon, so rainy as shit and cold. Be me, 16 years/O outdoor fag, not too much of a robot but prefer to be alone, spend lots of time in the woods, heard some weird shit but never thought twice. Had this cabin I had built with the few friends I did have, about 4 miles in a woods from my house, which was already 6 to 7 miles out of this old fishing town, for privacy not mentioning the name. Things are great, go up there with 1 to 2 people a couple times a week, usually stay the night on weekends. After a while we had a pretty good setup. You walk on this old logging road for what seems like forever then turn into the woods. We made sure to leave no tracks at the entrance so it wouldn't be found. We left some pricey shit up there, lights, dry bags, food, axes etc. Fast forward 3 months, and my best friend is moving to the Portland area. All 5 of my friends get together for one last trip up there. Never had everyone up there at once before. One friend's mom is being overly cautious, loading him with gear and food. Well shit, I'm not carrying that. JPG. Drive to my other friend's house and drop most of it off. Finally head back, around 7 p.m, starting to get dark. After walking a while we hear weird shit behind us. I say it's a deer. 2 of my friends are Mexican brothers, older one used to hunt and shit south of the border, said it sounds like a predator. I laughed and said something along the lines of, raccoons are predators, shut your mouth, trying to keep the conversation light. Didn't work. Later on there's this weird ass friggin' smell, like someone took a shit on a pile of rotting eggs, and soaked it in dog piss. Kinda getting weirded out, no clue what it was at the time. Finally hear yelp or some shit behind us, friends are royally friggin' spooked. I'm starting to get weirded out too. But we keep going because we are closer to the cabin than home by far. 10 minutes later we hear a crack up in front. I turn to face them and say, it's the boogeyman. Ooh. No response, nobody is friggin' moving, wide eyes staring past my head. Oh shit. JPEG. I turn around, this friggin' dog is sitting in the trail beyond us, massive friggin' thing, tell my friends not to move, and to get out their machetes/knives. They all grunt in approval. This thing opened its mouth, I swear it friggin' smiled at me, I will never forget that till the day I die, and it slowly picks its hands up off the ground. Nope.jpg. I turn around to the two Mexicans had already ran, older one dragging younger one, who didn't want to leave us. It friggin' screamed at us as we ran, sounded like the howl from an American werewolf in London but longer, it almost sounded like it had syllables. This friggin' thing should have killed us by now, it was chasing but not catching us, that same smile still on its face. I catch up to the Mexicans with the rest of us and it's gone, no friggin' trace of it. We got in a circle and walked all the way home. Nobody wants to talk about it, but we locked ourselves into a room with no windows, bringing every sharp object in the house along with us, even taking the gun out of my dad's room since he wasn't home. Over $800 in crap up there and nobody has the balls to go back up to this day.
I know two guys who seen them. Both are very honest dudes I've known a long time. I wouldn't take it seriously if not for them. They told me about their experiences just about a year before everyone had cheap internet, so they weren't repeating stuff they read online. They used the term monkey dog instead of dogman. One was hunting at night, saw a pair of them running through a field, grab the top of a fence and flip over it in one smooth stride. He said that before they got to the fence they stopped and turned to look at him in unison before moving on. He said he was in pretty good cover and didn't know how they knew he was there. One was driving his truck along a back country road and it crossed in front of him. He had two other guys in the cab and three in the bed and they all saw it. This was right outside Point Pleasant where the Mothman had been active 30 years earlier. 1993. B9 or 10. Dad worked in a janitorial supply distribution center. Northern Utah. Very rural. Moved there for a couple years. Dad being a salesman he had to travel around the cities. Going directly to schools, churches, hospitals, businesses trying to sell toilet paper and cleaning supplies general. One night he arrived really freaked out. His pickup truck had a dent in the front and smashed windshield. He was almost crying when arrived home. Mom thought he might had hit someone in the road or something. Dad was very hesitant to tell us what happened. He talked in private with my mom. But I was able to overhear the conversation. He was driving in the middle of one of those rural roads. Still some sunlight but almost sundown. He saw what it looked like a person on the distance. The person was walking towards my dad pickup truck. Middle of the road. Person bog on waving. Trying to get my dad attention. Dad pulled aside. When the person got closer he notices that the person was covering his face. Feeling a bit intimidated did not stop the engine. He just hit the brakes. As the person got closer he noticed that it was not a mask. Or if it was very realistic. The person seemed to have a dog face. And as he talked his dog mouth also moved. My dad was freaking out. Thinking it was some sort of prank. When it got closer. The person had human body, pants, shirt and normal hands, but the face was of a dog. Black eyes, ears, and a mouth just like dog. The person asked my dad to step out for a moment. He declined. The person with the dog face tried to open the door. When he looked forward there was another person with a dog head as well running towards the truck. He hit the gas. And hit the dog person in front of him. The impact cracked his windshield. As he went faster the two people were running behind his truck. Dad said he was like a 60+ mile per hour. Still on the rear view mirror. Eventually lost sight of them. When he arrived, he cannot comprehend, he was in shock. He even follow up with highway police. Doing a report and everything. He told everyone that story even to his friends. But he did not mention the dog face in fear of ridicule. But we talk in private he will confirm those were dog faces. It was a great bed night story I tough as I grew older. Then around 2003 that area became famous because of a ranch. A very notorious ranch. Skinwalker Ranch. But at the times when it went nationwide it was more about UFO and cows. 2018. My dad sent me on Facebook this story he hear on the radio. Minute 26 to 27. When in hear the story from the radio I got chills, and this is a story I knew since I was kid.
Anyone remember that story David Paulides told about a case from the year 1868, when a 3-year-old girl suddenly went missing in northern Michigan? Apparently she was at a lumber camp run by her father. According to the father, she had been there 1 second and then gone the next, as if she had simply blinked from existence. A search was launched, during which the panicked father enlisted the help of 2 hunters to try and find his young daughter lost out alone in the woods. The girl's name was called over and over again into the thick forest as night slowly crept up on them, yet no answer came back. It was as she had vanished into thin air. With the onset of darkness, the search was called off until the next morning, with no trace of where the young girl had gone off to. The next day the search continued and the hunters were hard at work scouring the woods for any sign of the missing girl. As they trudged through rugged, dense wilderness, they allegedly heard the shouts of a young girl from nearby, which sounded muffled and muted somehow, like sounds coming from farther away than they were, as if through some veil or blanket. The hunters claimed that they followed the source of the shouts to a river, and that as they fought through brush to approach, they could hear a large splash, after which they saw an enormous black shape that they took to be perhaps a bear entering the water, and swimming towards the opposite shore. As they stared in shock at the retreating beast, they noticed the girl standing upon a nearby log, minus some articles of clothing. When the girl was recovered, she seemed to be rather shaken up, and claimed that the creature they had seen was named Mr. Wolf and that he had been holding her prisoner there. She claimed that this Mr. Wolf had eaten her hat, taken her shoes, and had refused to let her leave under any circumstances, although he had also provided her with berries to eat. Michigan is Dogman country, so it just adds to the story.
Was going to post this in the other Dogman thread, but it got archived, so I guess I'll start a new one. I've told this story here before, but here it is again. When I was 2, 1987, we lived in a small house where all kinds of weird shit happened, but that's a completely other story. One night I kept waking up crying and telling my parents there was a monster outside my bedroom window. They asked me what it looked like, and I showed them my Jackalman action figure from Thundercats. They figured I was just being a kid and shrugged it off, tucked me back in, and went about their business. My aunt and uncle were visiting that night, so they were hanging out with them. All throughout that night our dog Sinbad was acting really strange and afraid, and he was a massive German Shepherd mix who had never been afraid of anything. He was anxious and kept whining and refused to go outside. Later on that same night my mom went to use the bathroom, and as she was in there she heard deep breathing and snorting coming from the window, which was a small, vent-like opening about 8 feet off the ground. She freaked out and yelled to my dad and uncle, and they ran outside and around the house. They've described what they saw as the biggest man they've ever seen, and when it saw them it bolted, took off running across the empty lot behind our house. They both swear to this day that when it was about halfway across the lot, it dropped down to all fours and tore off faster than they could have imagined, or hoped to keep up with. I don't remember any of this, as I was too young, but my parents and uncle aren't the types to make something like this up, and they've stuck to their story over the past 3 decades or so. I live in northern Michigan, where there is a legend that says the Dogman comes in the 7th year of each decade, which would like up with this. Just a weird story from my past, but one I like to get out there whenever I can.
Me and my girlfriend both believe in the paranormal. Her mother lives on a farm somewhere around an hour from a well-populated area. We've known about a spirit we call the man in the fog. He kept his distance and rarely caused trouble. Since my GFS sister had a baby, she's complained that at night there is something outside calling her name, and tapping at the window, and bad things started happening. Her fiancé left her after losing his mind. She was in an accident when she tried to leave her mother's property, as well as every cat on the property vanishing or dying. I learned this when me and my girlfriend visited a week ago. At first I laughed it off as Karma and Misty, my nickname for the man in the mist, as her sister is an awful mean person, who had been very cruel to me. That night me and my girlfriend had slept in a makeshift bed, in the back of her Kia Soul, as her mother's house is a mess, and we could hotbox her car we parked beneath her sister's window, at her father's request. I normally don't sleep deeply, I'm a paranoid insomniac, but somehow I fell into a very deep sleep. My girlfriend however did not. We had slept with my cat, who lives with me, and her dog that lives at her mother's, a small terrier mutt. Around 3 a.m. as my girlfriend is watching YouTube on my computer, she hears her dog outside the car, begging to get in. We had locked the doors for safety, and I'm glad we had. She stopped herself just before opening the door, seeing her dog at her feet, just as asleep as me, and my cat at her side. She looked through the rear window. A creature, well at least the top half of a creature was humanoid. She said its face was dog-like, its body though, just half a body was furry and it was scratching and tapping at the hatchback. She grabbed a bat she keeps in the car for protection, and got out threatening it and yelling at it, then went back and locking the door. It stared at her after she retreated into the car. I asked her to draw it, she didn't wanna but did a quick doodle when I asked.
My encounter took place many years ago. I never had the faintest explanation for it until a couple months ago, when I randomly stumbled across Dogman on the internet. I was in my early 20s, working swing shifts at the time and commuting about 100 miles each way, so it was usually around 2 o'clock in the morning by the time I got home. I saw the monster, as I called it, on the northernmost section of Trunk Road in the Matanuska Valley, in Alaska. This area is almost smack in between the towns of Palmer and Wasilla. I was only about 10 miles from home at that point, so it must have been around 2 a.m. Trunk Road is a narrow, two-lane road, consisting of nothing but twists and turns. The surrounding terrain is somewhat swampy and thick with black spruce. It was late October, days before Halloween. There was no snow on the ground, but it was cold enough to be wary of ice. I was driving an '82 Subaru SW, going about 20 miles per hour around a curve, when my headlights caught a large, dark figure up ahead. I'm bad at judging distance, maybe 6 car lengths away. I instinctively let off the gas, coasting closer. At first, I assumed it was a moose, as the area is infested with them, but no, it was standing upright. Bear, then. No, not a bear. It looked so strange. Tall enough to be an uncommonly large bear, but far too slender, and it looked like it had spikes running down its neck and back. A Halloween prop. It was an odd, but effective place for one. All those thoughts ran through my head in a fraction of a second. The car was still coasting closer and I could see more details. It was standing in profile, gazing across the road. I could clearly see its wolfish muzzle, large, upright ears. The spikes on its back were in fact clumps of fur. Its spine curved in a smooth, very natural-looking way. It was standing in the ditch, inches from the pavement. Because I was focused on its upper body, I do not recall anything about its back legs or if it had a tail. I did see its front legs, though, very doggy-looking, hanging awkwardly down and slightly toward its front, exactly as you'd expect if a dog stood upright. While it clearly had a canine look, there was still something off about it that I cannot articulate. It was perfectly still, and at this point, given the proximity to Halloween, I was quite convinced it was some sort of Halloween prop because it was clearly not any kind of existing animal. I was deeply impressed and gently stepped on the brakes, intending to stop and examine it closely. Then it turned its head towards me. In the tiny fraction of a second that it took for it to swivel its head, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The fluidness of its movement removed any and all doubt that this was some kind of prop. It was horribly, terrifyingly alive. The pale, off-white glow of its eyeshine in the headlights destroyed any possibility of a human in a costume. I think I sat there gaping at it in shock for a few seconds, the car barely moving by now, but still inching closer. As I was almost upon it, I think it could have leaned forward and touched the car if it had wanted. I had to look up to see its face. Again, I'm a bad judge of such things, but I am 5 feet 4 and it was a hell of a lot taller than me. Tall like a polar bear standing. 7 feet? 8? I really can't say. I snapped out of my trance and slammed on the gas. The car fishtailed and I prepared myself for death by monster, as I was certain I'd end up in the ditch, but the tires caught the pavement and I drove like a complete maniac all the way home. I did not look back. I have only been on that section of road a few times since, never alone and never in the dark. For the next several years of driving that commute, I went 20+ miles out of the way to avoid Trunk Road. The thing never made any aggressive moves, but there was something about it that felt very, I don't know, predatory. I never saw anything remotely like it again and never heard any stories about it in the area.
There's a friggin' weird encounter I was reading about earlier tonight and I saved it in my notepad. While this story might sound like I'm trolling, I assure you I didn't make it up. And since you asked for anything Dogman related, here it is. Back in the winter of 1961, near Lawton, Oklahoma, I remember waking up during the wee hours of the morning while it was still very dark. I was in my mid-teens, and I still recall the partially open window facing the backyard where we kept a crow in a cage. Nearby there was a hole in the ground. As I looked out I saw a strange figure emerging from the hole. It appeared to be very tall, thin, dark and had a dog-like head with very pointy ears and a pointed muzzle. I was paralyzed with fear as I watched this thing walk over to the cage, reach right through the chicken wire and grab the crow. It pulled out a knife from somewhere and with a quick jab, stuck it into the bird, then dropped the dead crow back into its cage. I don't recall anything after that except crawling back into the bed and pulling the covers over my head. I stayed there until daylight hit, desperately needing to pee. Once it was light, I ran to the front of our house and awakened my parents, telling them something had killed the crow and I had seen it. They laughed it off, but to assure me the crow was okay, walked me to the back of our yard to where the crow's cage was. The crow was dead. My dad chucked it over the fence into a nearby field and told me that the crow froze to death.
Here's a cool story from Zimbabwe, OP. Hwange National Park, Zimbabwe, 2019. A father and son were on their way to Bulawayo late at night. The son was driving and they were traveling from a housing project where the father had just secured a contract to survey the land. Naturally, they were excited for the project, so the two were in extremely high spirits. But suddenly, there was a loud pop, and the car swerved to the side of the road. It was a blown-out tire. Luckily, the father and son were unharmed, and the car wasn't too badly damaged. However, they now found themselves needing to change the tire in the middle of nowhere. They set about changing the tire, their high spirits now replaced by a nervous feeling. The place seemed unnaturally silent. They had left the headlights of the car on to provide a bit of light, and they began to notice shadows moving around them and around the car. From the shadows, they heard deep growls. The father kept his cool for his son's sake, but he was clearly disturbed. "Just keep working on changing that tire," he said as he frantically attempted to finish. They managed to finish and the father and son hurried into the car. That's when they saw 4 pairs of gold-yellow eyes just at the edge of the darkness. The son hit the accelerator and the car took off, but to their horror the eyes started following them, matching their speed. Then, one of the creatures outpaced the car, revealing something they could not believe. Although the creature ran on all 4 legs, like a coyote or a wolf, it moved like nothing they'd ever seen. And although its head was that of a wild dog with large fangs, the beast was built like a lean, fit basketball player with well-defined muscles. They realized in that instant that they are being hunted. The son floored it, praying he could lose the strange dogs. As they passed the one creature which had been running ahead of them, the two watched in horror as it suddenly stood up fluidly, revealing its full height. It was easily 7 feet, with hands like claws, and it reached out towards the car, but luckily the car was too fast for it. As soon as they knew they were somewhat safe, the father broke down and cried from a mixture of relief and shock. The end. I also read a story out of Canada in which some people were attacked by giant werewolves. They said that first they heard a bizarre sound, then they heard the sound of what they thought were large men landing on the ground, as though they dropped out of the sky, and then they saw the wolfmen. I've heard of a similar sound referenced when people spot the so-called black dog from English folklore.
Was driving through North Carolina, outskirts south of Henderson. Was about 8 p.m. when I went through a gully. Mind you, this was relatively thick woodland, so didn't feel like hitting deer. Taking it slow and I see glowing yellow eyes. Naturally I press my brakes cause deer are friggin' skittish. It's not a friggin' deer. Head's too friggin' big. Not a black bear. Ears are pointed straight up. Dark gray furry face. Said thing starts standing. Then when it sees him staring right at it, starts lowering its head back down as if trying to hide. That was all in the span of about 5 seconds. Apparently there's a tabernacle in that area. First time I've ever seen something that's basically a werewolf. But I've seen stranger shit along roads at night.
Damn Anon, yeah, that's messed. I can see why you'd shit yourself. I would have thought it was closer and someone was watching me or some shit. Now you've given me the inspiration to tell an Inwood story he told me a couple months back. Here we go. Be my friend. Also be Inwood's fiend. Recently bought a PSAK 74 and buttload of 7.62 by 39. Decide to go Inwoods with a buddy. Be around February. Go Inwoods on private property, his grandfather's land, which is like 500-ish acres. He lives near Jonesboro, most I'll say. Pack car and head off. Friend is also a /K/Omondo and likes to run a cheap Shicom rig. Other friend is running a Norinco SKS with Type .56 SKS stripper clip chest rig. Pick related, stalker vibes. They both decide to hike out into a large hill/mountain in the middle of the property. They arrive at the area. Set up camp, bushcraft shelters and shit. Cook spam and beans. Run around the immediate area like fags trying to find areas of potential attackers. LARPfags.fov. They run around until dark collecting firewood and LARPing. They get comfy for the night. Comfyposting.exe. Falls asleep for maybe 2 hours. Wakes up to a terrible reek. Body odor and wet dog. Friend wakes up other friend. Yo, do you smell that shit? Yeah, WTF is that? Attribute it to a skunk or some shit. Try to go to sleep, but can't because of the smell. Friend carries a ppm 88 and puts that shit on to help. Does not help. PNG. The smell is getting progressively closer. Described it as moving. They start hearing crunching a couple yards out towards their 1 o'clock. Grab AK. Grab SKS. Cradle them like newborn babies. Friend grabs headlamp and puts it on. Wants to look at what it could be. Gets up and when he gets straight up almost vomits in mask. Friend kinda stands there petrified by the noises walking around near their camp. They set up a perimeter to try and see what it is. The sounds are getting much closer. Friend's adrenaline would let him throw a car into space, that's how hyped he is. Decides for whatever reason to turn on head torch. Light comes on and green eyes are staring back at him. Kinda cools down thinking it's a raccoon or something. Wait, that raccoon must be in a tree or something. The eyes are higher than a raccoon on the ground. Him and his friend walk closer. As they get closer they start to see it's not a frigging raccoon. It runs away and around them. He catches a glimpse of it and it's a really big black dog. They vip their guns every way it goes. Eventually my friend shoots at the dog. The dog stops and stares. They can still only see the eyes and when it moves. He shoots at it again hitting center mass. The eyes raise 3 more feet and start moving straight towards them. Both guys are dumbstruck, and before they can do anything really, it comes fully into view. It's a dog, but it's standing up straight. Has body of bear, legs of wolf, human hands with long nails on them. And its head, according to my friend, was missing skin on its jaws and gums, leaving it to kinda look like a skull, pic related. Friend looks it dead in the eyes and said he felt that he was looking into the eyes of something pure evil, a dark primal evil. He immediately raises his rifle and just mag dumps in its general direction, and so does his friend. The Dogman, that's what he called it, screams from getting hit with beautiful 7.62 by 39. They kinda turn and start heading back into camp. All the while watching the area for the thing they just mag dumped into. They see it take off and run off back deeper into the woods. They grab their shit, douse the fire, and head for the ATV they came in on. As they're running, they can hear heavy pained breathing. And deep guttural yips and barks/howls. My friend reloaded at this point, turns and just starts shooting wildly in the general direction behind them. The sounds and leaves crunching from it following slows down. They get on ATV and take off. They arrive at grandfather's house, and kind of explain away all the gunfire and why they left as target practice and just getting bored. Grandfather kind of just looks like he knows more than what he's letting on. Later that night, from their beds in the house, they hear a set of howls that happen every couple of minutes. I showed him the movie, An American Werewolf in London, and when the werewolf howls and the sounds it made happen in the movie, he stopped it and told me that's what it sounded like. Said they sounded kind of humanish.